Good space time, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Web3 podcast, your source for educational insights into the Web3 universe and your connection hub to discovering those that contribute to building the decentralized world. Today, we are joined by Sheldon Dearr from Omnity. We discuss studying art, rubber duckies, and ransomware. We talk about monetary economics, the adult industry, and authority. Finally, we touch upon single points of failure, helping people, and feeling good. If you enjoy our podcast, please share this episode onto your favorite social platform and help us spread Web3 values into the universe.
We can have monetary economies that sort of supersede, just regular governance structure, regular business structure. Why would I want the government to go deeper into looking at my camera? The user is almost a single point of failure. Thought I was prepared for being a starving artist, and then I started starving and said, okay, we got to do something else. Having just raw data on chain does not solve a problem.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Web3 podcast. I have Sheldon Dearr with me from Omnity today, ex-Octopus Network. Sheldon, hi. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to join you.
Glad to have you on, man. Really glad. I have some questions prepared, but of course, usual boring thing. Well, it's not that boring, but it's a common thing. I do ask my guests to make a proper introduction because my intro is like, this is John from blah, blah. Yeah, well, it doesn't tell anything about the person. So if I can ask you to introduce yourself, tell me and the listeners everything you want us to know about you. And primarily, how did you get into Web3? What's your journey, if it's okay, of course?
Sure. So I'm an art student. I'm wildly unqualified by a collegiate measure. I went to school for electronic music for 4 years. I was playing oboe and English horn and teaching percussion and teaching piano during that time. And that was great. And I really enjoyed it. But also I thought I was prepared for being a starving artist. And then I started starving and said, okay, we got to do something else. And I'm really glad that thing was network security because I happened to fall into that in Austin. Austin, Texas is a great city for music and tech. And I gave it a fair chance. I did some mastering. I tried to get some shows for electronic music artists I was working with. And it was just too much. So in 2012, I started working at an MSP or an ILEC or whatever. There's a bunch of bad acronyms for these kinds of companies. But basically, I worked for a technology company that was responsible for other people's entire IT departments and their network departments and their ISP. And that was a good experience. I learned a lot really quickly. I moved up in that company. And as I was moving up in that company, I was on tier 2. I was responsible for Yum Corporation. So that's like, Taco Bell, KFC, these big chains. I became responsible for their franchises, and someone walked into a Taco Bell in Illinois and plugged in what's called a rubber ducky, a little USB, and that USB fried the port on that old Windows machine, because these are not modern point of sale, right? This is, it's a desktop machine. So this person plugs in a worm, which then fries that physical USB port, and that worm gets CoinHive running on about 9 computers inside that franchise, because the way that their network security was designed with us, we didn't run their computers, and we were supposed to let their computers talk to each other on evasive ports where, 50,000, 65,000 port range, Bitcoin will try to communicate with its neighbors, will try to reach out to the network via broadcast. So Taco Bell was blaming us, saying, hey, you need to fix this. You're responsible for securing the network. You guys have to change what you're doing. You have to solve this problem. We said, it's coming from the computers. We can't control the computers, guys. So that led to a month and a half's long research to demonstrate to them not just what Bitcoin is, but how it behaves in a network environment and how they could make business decisions to order us to change what we're doing, but also that they needed to change the antivirus or at least, do something for the security on these endpoints to get them to stop mining Bitcoin. That research made me absolutely fall in love. It was not my first time with Bitcoin. It was my first time taking Bitcoin seriously. And ever since then, I've just been looking for, what are these systems, or what is this interesting way that we can have monetary economies that sort of supersede, just regular governance structure, regular business structure. And yeah, it's been a good 12 years. The first year and a half, I was just kind of fumbling around in the dark. I mined on some CPUs when that was still beneficial, just barely, got in there before the Butterfly Labs incident and a bunch of other ASIC silly things happened. But yeah, ever since then, I've been interested, what can we do for Bitcoin? And in the block wars time period, when we were discussing, how are we going to adapt after SegWit, um, there was a pretty long discussion about compute on Bitcoin and what it should mean to keep using Bitcoin, not just as a monetary tool. And I was a fan of elastic blocks weighted based on the last 2 weeks of difficulty and things like that. I was trying to look for some sort of compromise that we could burst up to 10 megabytes, but it would be very expensive and things like that. I understand that's totally not ideal for infrastructure providers, indexers, that's very difficult for them. But I was in favor of that sort of structure, which probably would have been fine today with modern blobs. But either way, that just led me to look for more things that are not Bitcoin that would support, distributed compute or, an economic system of compute that's sort of independent from, hey, I paid my cloud bill. So yeah, I've been poking around for quite a while, and in 2021, after doing some moderating on Facebook and helping out with research papers and some small engagements and things, I got tapped on the shoulder and said, "Hey, would you like to work with this project?" And I said, "Yeah." And at the time, that was Octopus Network, and we were looking at consumer chains for Polkadot on Near, and I thought that was really cool. I say for Polkadot, but it's really for their chain template substrate. And I thought that was a great concept and a challenging business idea. And, we took a stab at it, but that isn't going to work out. It's something we're transitioning away from. It was a consumer chain business under Octopus Network. And now, because we're launching our newer series of products based on Bitcoin, that's going to be Omnity Network. So I'm proud to have stuck around that entire time, because consumer chains is a really difficult business, but we stuck it through for a good 3 years. And now that we're moving on to Bitcoin assets, I'm going to be keeping it with Omnity for quite a while.
Let's go back a little bit in time. Let's do time travel. So, somebody sticks a rubber ducky. Now, I mean, that is a crazy story to get familiar with crypto, right? I mean, that is awesome. But how did you, why? So okay, I mean, most of people, after such an incident would say, well, I'm not touching that shit. I mean, why did you have the opposite effect? Why did you have the opposite effect?
Well, there's two major reasons. One, the fear mongering for ransomware and, things like Monero or Bitcoin itself. That was still kind of gradually picking up speed, but it was very niche at the time. It wasn't like a standard thing that you knew that if someone tried to take over and encrypt your file systems, they would ask you for a untraceable payment. They would ask for payment that's not a credit card or not fiat in some way, not regulated, jurisdiction-bound currency. So I thought there would be some dual purpose to doing that research. And after I started it, I found this entity called Cato Networks that was kind of already working on that sort of thing, but they were working on it purely from a ransomware perspective. And I thought that was great, because at the time there was not a lot of ransomware research and not a lot of, sort of enterprise-grade defense for these kinds of things. And it gave me a different angle of, okay, yes, it's the bad guy's money, but is this the money that someone would choose for porn? I'm not saying that I'm a supporter of porn. I'm saying that porn has directed certain markets, for example, Blu-ray instead of Super DVD. There's, business demand there, and because those kinds of websites have asked for those payments, and we used to see all these little silly casinos and things like that. I was wondering, hey, what makes this a good choice for them? Why is this their fitment? Why is this their business use case? And it just led me to ask a bunch of questions, and all of the answers were that, it's a self-regulating system of sorts. It's not designed to be, superseded by some authority. It's not backed by an army. I thought that was wildly different from the U.S. government that I've had some disdain for well before 2012, if that wasn't obvious. But, I thought that was a productive alternative, is to have your own sort of economic structure based on code. I was very impressed by that. And there was one other thing, to be fair. In doing that initial research, what made me really want to pull the thread more is that I saw WinSox tunnels going through the Great Firewall of China. I could tell that there was these packets coming from nodes that were in Chinese IP space. And according to some tools that I was using that consume network data across the world, they were saying, hey, these look like WinSox tunnels. And I thought that was very impressive, that someone would try to get through the Great Firewall just to run a protocol that could supersede governments. So that also lit something in my mind that just said, wow, there's a lot of room for possibility here. Other people see it. I should give it a chance.
I'm gonna stick this in. I probably shouldn't stick this sentence in, but I'm gonna stick it in. Another reason I love crypto is because when you open a bank account, you just see a number. It's either a minus or a plus. With crypto, as we're talking, my wallet is sinking and it's appearing more coins. I love it. No, I'm joking. Okay, so just to say about porn. Sorry, Sheldon. I had to say that. Sorry, guys, for the listeners. I started to sync a Monero wallet when we started this conversation, and as Sheldon talking, the tip of my eye cannot help to notice that it's sinking, and there is yeah. No, but just to say for the record, man, I really, I don't think, we can make, of course, a conversation out of it. It's up to you. But just to say about porn, in my opinion, porn is a great, fucking is for pleasure. Let's start with that. And porn is an amazing industry, in my opinion. And the fact that it's been demonized, we still demonize prostitution. We still demonize drugs as a society, yet we adore war, we adore murder, and many other things like theft and extortion. So,
we adore
it's a weird thing demonizing porn.
Every other night on ABC, yes. CBS, these mainstay American channels, they're still using it as a plot point. They're still using it for entertainment. I mean, I don't mean to step on your words about it, but to me, it comes down to almost like a data privacy thing. If I'm with another consenting adult and I'm making a video, it doesn't necessarily matter what we're doing in that video. If you need to control the content of what's in that video, that's a police state's narrative. That's a police state's goal to say, hey, here's some data that you and another person have generated in the privacy of your own home. We need to control this data. I recognize there's kind of a limit to these things that people will accept, and that's okay. But at the same time, by default, you can't stop me from making a video right now with my phone. So why would I want the government to go deeper into looking at my camera?
Of course. I think that sentence here of, that we are two individual. I think the whole individual, like I said, it's a whole conversation. We can jump, of course, into it. But yeah, we agree here. I'm gonna jump. I just wanted to get it out to say that, you're talking to a person who is very open-minded. So feel free to, go that way. I'm absolutely that way as well. But man, back to your journey, you had the internet is a marvelous thing, and you worked even for such companies as HP, for example, right? Which are big, crazy companies. And I guess you were younger. I guess we're about the same age, more or less, and a question, right? Why didn't you feel like when you were working for HP or for any other similar, not music companies already? Because I can understand, young guy kind of looking music. Yeah. A dream, and then you kind of go working on IT and you start working for this companies with a name, right? And then suddenly somebody taps you on the shoulder and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go work for you guys. Why? What was driving you? I'm trying to find what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to find you kind of already kind of went there a little bit, with the blogs and the not having an army and everything, but I'm really trying to find what made you not go back. Okay, you saw this. And we all know how working in Web3 can be, sometimes it's quotes and quotes here, quotations, sorry, here, flipping burgers. And sometimes it's, earning a lot of money, but we still stick with it. And I'm trying to find what is it that made you stick. And apart from the love, for not having an army that back in, I'm being, of course, ironic here, but I'm curious, really.
So when I was moving on to HP, I was in the middle of collective action at that workplace. So I thought that a bunch of people who worked with me were underpaid. I thought some people there were very tenured and comfortable with their pay. I didn't necessarily know what it was, and I didn't need to know. But I knew that my pay was below market significantly. And I was still okay with that because, like I said, I came to that business and did a lot of work. That business doesn't exist anymore. It was called Megapath at the time. They've been reacquired and rebundled and all kind of stuff. But that business taught me a lot and really shaved down my rougher points a lot and helped me be positive in moments where I really didn't want to be in order to get someone's cooperation and things like that. So I spent a lot of time there, enough to know, okay, we can do better than this. Let's get together as a group and align on something that we have social consensus on and use that to make something happen. I know I'm being a wild generalist here. I'm really zooming out. But that group of people that were in that room, it's one room full of cubicles, and there was about 80 of us. There was more than 50 of us that believed, hey, if we as a group try to send this message to management, we can get better performance for ourselves. We'll get, better pay for ourselves. Why shouldn't we do this? And at some point in those negotiations, management decided that those numbers, those extra $2 an hour or whatnot, were going to come from either my role on tier 3 with this other guy. We were sort of advising engineering and solving some weird problems. And we were both making, like, I think $24 an hour or a little bit more than that. And they were estimating they would still have to put up a little bit extra allocation to make that possible for all those other employees. But at some point in the negotiation, they decided that pay was going to have to come from us. So lucky for me, right around that time, HP calls me back and says, hey, you can work for us on this, demerger or merger engagement. And I said, okay, great, I'll come along. That company that I was coming from, Megapath, they decided that they are not going to take the collective action forward. They're going to push down this sort of, I don't want to say uprising, but, frustrations from their tenured and non-tenured employees who were being paid below market rate. And they decided they were just going to take that pay that I was accruing and give it to this other engineer, the other person who was working on me with tier 2 as a sort of like, hold the line person. But he was doing a lot of work and he didn't want to sort of get deeper into these social consensus. And of course, he was, annoyed by people, like many people in IT can be. You get silly social interactions that go with business. And basically, he absorbed the majority of my pay and crushed the collective action. So it taught me that even though there was a large group of us and we had a social consensus, there wasn't a financial anchor for that consensus outside of us as a group agreeing to do something. So as soon as it was clear that the other people who were in collective action weren't willing to leave the company like I did, it became almost no pressure for that entity. And my colleague, Robert, basically took the majority of my pay as part of his negotiation with management because he was trying to take that larger chunk. Now, this entire time, I didn't think I could get a job in Bitcoin or crypto worth a dang. I didn't think that was possible by any means. I thought I wasn't qualified. I thought I wouldn't be able to do anything productive. And I was certain that I had to stay in network security as the guy who knew a little bit of something about this and could be useful as the Bitcoin guy or whatever. And I was for a little while. But leading up to that was this experience of like watching incentives and disincentives crumble when people aren't willing to enforce disincentives. And, what is it? Conditional non-core soft fork or, some of these other BIPs and different changes that people want to make now. It's a very similar level of like, hey, we have to be socially consensus on this before we take this consensus on chain or it's not going to work. And I think that we're going to keep seeing those kinds of things in a general sense, but in a really specific sense to me, it hurt my feelings. I was sad. I got emotional about it. I was still young and hormonal. I was thinking like, hey, this makes the most sense for the most people. This is beneficial to all of us. People will give Robert less of a hard time if they're motivated to solve their own problems, literally by being paid and by having a little bit more structure for people are getting that pay. And I was wrong. I was not correct. I was just in my idealism and, hoping that making things better would make things better. And that's not how systems of incentives and disincentives work. That's not how people work. So without going in the deep end of the psychology, it basically that experience was enough for me to be like, hey, this is not the thing that I think that I can balance and manage necessarily. I should get deeper on the research and tech side. That'll be more comfortable for me in a business environment where I can make money. And over time, I was gradually turning that leaf over of, hey, I can make money in a business environment, but I'm not going to make progress on this, this concept.
It's very interesting that you kind of came to that point because, like, I think that when I personally wanted to start, I mean, I've been in crypto pretty much the same time as you. We more or less, I think, started at the same time. The journey is like 2011, 2012. But, I feel like when I started my own project, which was about like 4.5 years ago, one of my primary reasons inside me was to be able to prove to anyone in the world that anyone, doesn't matter of their skills or knowledge, because I don't consider myself smarter or better than anyone else, can earn money with Web3 for themselves from anywhere in the world by using Web3 today, not tomorrow, not in 5 years. It was 4.5 years ago, so 4.5, sorry. And I think that drove me as well. So I totally connect to what you say. I totally understand that.
It's, if you recognize everybody's got to eat, you got to start somewhere. Just to agree with you. Like if you see that need, then, that's a good baseline for these other arguments, because no one's going to stand on the picket line with me who's not able to get their food.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like, I think sometimes we are, I mean, you said not to go deep into psychology, but, to keep it on the, like, a level of, balance of psychology, Web3 working kind of ethics. I guess that it feels, at least, as a person who is seen as a CEO and as a founder and as a worker, like Web3 projects, I don't know why people are scared to say that Web3 projects need to eat and developers need to eat. And it's not just Web3 projects need to eat, any projects need to eat, right? And people are afraid. It's a bit like about porn and sex, what we talked about. People are it's like a taboo. And it's like a taboo to admit that I need money, but I do need money. In today's world, I mean, I can live in a barter system if it allows me to, but it will be very difficult. I need something, and by money, I'm saying, it doesn't necessarily mean Bitcoin or dollars or anything, something of value to exchange for other goods and services. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying completely. Man, a little bit back to you, to your story, just to kind of like ask the last question about the story, if it's okay with you. You said music, and I'm sorry, but I love music, and my girlfriend is a DJ. Well, part of what she does is a DJ, and as you can probably see, all the padded walls, and there is some DJ equipment around. So I want to ask you about your music background, like in 2 words. Tell me, like, I saw it online, and you kind of mentioned it yourself. Please.
So if anybody applies my name to Google Dorking, my name's moderately unique. And you can find a lot of funny pictures of me with long hair doing different things. One of them is playing a toy piano in the Vizcaya Gardens in Miami. One of them is teaching marching band. One of them is playing oboe and English horn. But I started playing drums when I think I was 3 or something. I'm not great at playing set, but my dad had a kit, and we had a piano in the house. So it was just normal for me to try stuff. I was very lucky that we had musical instruments around that I could just, play with. And I did that from a young age. And, at age 6, it started being a regular thing. Hey, we want you to take piano lessons. Please focus on the piano. It's good for your development. It's, good for the future. I'm like, I don't want to do it. This is boring. But, after a little while, I got used to it. I liked it a little bit more. And then somewhere around age 10 or 11, I guess middle school age, I recognized that if I took piano, I would have this kind of like small bubble, and I wouldn't necessarily be performing with others. And I realized I could continue with piano, but I'd have to be a soloist, and it'd be more of this kind of like grind for hours a day playing the piano at school. And I thought that wouldn't be enjoyable if I couldn't do it with somebody else. I thought I needed to pick a band or an orchestra instrument to be able to sort of jam with other people, right? So initially, I played sax. I played sax before middle school for like 3 months. And I had one of these music teachers that taught multiple wind instruments. And I was really small at the time. I was like very, very early pre-growth spurt. I was still a tiny kid. And an alto saxophone in my hand looked like a tenor saxophone. I was holding it like this. It felt really big to me because I was still a little shrimp. And someone came in with this lunchbox size case. And I said, I don't know what that is, but I want to play that. Give me that one. And thank goodness it wasn't a clarinet, because I would have been miserable if it was a clarinet. But it happened to be an oboe. And there's some similarity for the finger patterns that you use on oboe and sax. And I practiced for 3 hours a day to really ramp up. I thought that I would need to catch up so that I could be, worth something, to be useful. And by the time I got to middle school, I was actually kind of competitive as an oboe player from practicing for 3 hours a day for the entire summer. And that was kind of like the majority of my music career after that. I don't want to say majority in the sense of dominant, but most of the time was between that month when I started, competing and doing really well as an oboist, and college, when the local college in downtown Miami said, hey, please come play with us. We understand that we can't give you a full scholarship necessarily, but we can give you a little bump. please come play with us. And I said, okay. And about a year into that, I was like, okay, this is what it's going to be like to be a professional oboist. I'm done. No way. I can't handle this. I'm out. I got to find something else. I still love music, but I'm not going to be a performer for my entire life. It's way too volatile of a career. I'm not going to feel stable in my own home and things like that. And yeah, I kind of graduated from that to electronic music around the same time because I wasn't interested in electronic music while playing oboe for the most part, except for some like avant-garde weird stuff and like a little bit less structured electronica. And I think it was the summer before I was getting to college that I started paying attention to like a little bit more garage and a little bit more D&B, and then I fell right into dubstep just as it was becoming popular in the UK. I hit it just before it became popular in the States, and then started showing everybody that stuff. And going through the birth and death of a genre in its sort of like peak of popularity,
Yes.
it does something to you. It affects your development, especially if it happens to you a bit younger. I think like it's not a small thing to sort of fall in love, watch a progress for something that's struggling to find its definition, and then watch that definition be totally obliterated by a market that just wants you to turn the compressor up all the way. I'm not mad at it.
You're talking about crypto or still music? I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm sorry. I had to say that. I'm sorry.
Just turn
Go
the
on,
compression
please.
up. Yeah, for sure. Just no,
Turn the blocks up. The block size up.
just more throughput. No, I
I'm
I
sorry.
replied to somebody who said this the other day. It was one of these college students who I met at an event or a hackathon at one point. It's like, hey, we should be maximizing throughput. We have to compete with Solana, or we have to compete with all these other things. I'm like, I can buy an HPC with a credit card. I can rent a quantum computer with my debit card. I need better trust structures for these things. I don't need better throughput for these things. We can always get more throughput next year, next week. That's much different from the trust structure that comes with setting up the system and custody of information and things like that. But yeah, that's a heavy dog leg left. We don't have to turn off into quite that, but yeah, it's like I'm guessing that you were popping up nodes and running for experimental Bitcoin forks, or just, hey, we want to try something, but it's based on core. Here's our alternative. Here's why we like it. Here's these other things. There's a lot of reasons to try stuff, but to be there for that like birth and death also of a of a mentality of a sort of social consensus around a product, it it doesn't change that product, but it changes the most extreme part of that market that might try to drag that product into something different that'll have a different definition. And I don't know. I'm getting too general now. We can come back from this, but yeah,
No,
blockchain's a
no,
hell
no,
of
no,
a
no, no. It
genre.
was good. It was perfect. Perfect. No, no, it was perfect. I was asking about music because, well, it's something that I love,
I
and
see the
I
headphones.
find, I find art to be very interesting and a very different, of everything, right? It's something like if we look at all our transactional relationships, because humans are transactional, art is pretty much one of the, yeah, there is a transaction there. Yeah, I like it. It makes me feel good. That's my reward. But it doesn't contain greed. It's a crazy thing. Like art is one of the only industries which is non-greed driven. It's driven by some strange thing within. Sorry, go on. You want to react to that? I can
No,
see that. Please.
I give you your piece also because I agree, but also I think it's like the perfect place for art to be an instrument for corruption and for other things that are, a little bit more unsavory. It doesn't mean that art's bad. It just means that because art has this highly subjective market and, just wild different details into it. Like I think a lot of Americans still know the name Pollock. They know this like funny, slapping the paint on its style, but they don't know that art was promoted by the CIA to have an impact on international art markets and to confuse art dealers in Europe and have this unintended effect. I'm not saying that it's a conspiracy by any means. This is public fact. This is documented, but it's funny because art is the perfect place for the free flow of ideas, the exchange of information that isn't, let's say, easy to weight as transactionally appropriate. I can trade you an orange for your art. Was that worth it to me? I don't know. Was it worth it to you? Were you that hungry? Was it that bad of a piece of art that you would trade it for just one fruit? No disrespect to your art, but that kind of breaking transactionalism or sort of making it a little bit less fuzzy, it forces us to find these other definitions relative to the art. And, sometimes that's a little more productive in the sense that, hey, I'm going to barter with you and I'm going to promote you as an artist, because I do that for a lot of artists. I do commission pieces when I can. But, there's a different level to that, which is that artist has to eat and that they're going to be working on, trying to make their art their living if they can do that. And, I'm zooming out again. We can come back. But yeah, there's a lot of room in art in general for these kinds of social consensus and structures to come up.
Feel free to zoom out as much as you like. Like this is what I say, when I have guests on, I really like to see people talk about what matters to them and to see them, like go into their own thoughts. I have my notes here, but it doesn't mean, have to go through them. I can tell you that roughly with the better the conversation, the less of my notes I usually touch. It really is like that. Like the more flowy it is, because and I love and anyways. But what was I gonna say, just to finish off your thought and my thought, was that I find like that a lot of similarities between blockchain and art. And what I mean is that blockchain does have a lot of greed, of course, and it does have a lot of the normal drivers that the other markets have, but it's a very interesting thing that art and blockchain are those two types of things that can be used either to create something perfectly good or perfectly evil. And when I say perfect, of course, not in a good way, perfectly evil. And they are very similar in this way. You have to be either a numismat, right? Can you say that in English? Somebody who collects coins? What do you call somebody who collects numismat? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Or coin collector, there we go. Or an artist, to be crazy enough to pay 1 million euros for a 5 euro coin, So I find a lot of similarities in those things. And I guess that's why. And this is a nice way, actually, me to bring you, though, to this topic that I don't know if you were expecting this, but DNA on chain. I want to talk to you about that. I know that you had an interesting article that you wrote, a piece about DNA and owning your DNA. And I'm going to give you a small, I don't know if I'm going to make a question out of it, but I'm going to give you an opinion, sort of, or a sentence, and then I want to hear what I'm going to try to make a question out of it, at least. So in my personal opinion, and it is not just my personal opinion, I've seen it in the cypherpunk community, I've seen it in the Web3 community, every single project that exists today that claims that we are putting DNA on chain or whatever it is they're doing. Basically what they're doing is they're taking the results of your DNA, writing the information into a block, and hence making it right now available to everyone to fucking see. Now, to me, that's not DNA on chain. To me, that's kind of like, what, and here is, like I said, it's going to be hard for me to get a question, but what I would love to see, at least in that structure, and the reason I'm directing this at you is because you wrote that piece, which is a very interesting piece. And for the listeners, there will be, and sorry to spin off, for the listeners, everything me and Sheldon are talking about is at the show notes, including all those pieces and everything that we're mentioning. So you can see and you can go and read it. Please do. In the episode description, of course. But what I would love to see is, I don't know if it's, I don't not know. I know it's not possible today, but I would love to see is something crazy, like actually a way of, transforming DNA onto some kind of provable ledger. And I don't mean just the data. We are talking a bit of like metamorphose here. I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna stop here because I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to get at. But your piece was like aroused me, so I want to talk about it. Let me start with this.
I have to give credit to my co-author. She commonly goes by Decentricity on the internet, but Pandu is the co-author of that article. And the product that we were thinking about when we were looking at that is ultimately one of those consumer chains on Omnity back in the day, on Octopus back in the day. And that was the first one to launch, which was designed to be a app chain that was a health product. It was based on this other team's work, Crust, based, saying that, hey, you can encrypt that data before you put it on chain and then encrypt that encrypted hash and give people access to that so that they could read the hash and confirm that that information matches without looking at the actual, GTACA patterning that's going to be posted, or about the summary data from that review that would also be posted. So the idea ultimately to get that data on chain was to make it usable for third parties so that you wouldn't have to just straight up disclose it to the public. But of course, I know what encrypted data at rest means. It means that, if you pay enough money and spend enough time, then eventually you decrypt that data. We make these assumptions based on computers' horsepower and, some assumptions in cryptography. But what it meant for me in that category, in that article, looking at the product they had worked on, what they wanted to do, what I would have done if I was in their shoes, for example, it's not very different, maybe a slight modification, but only because I'm used to seeing things that are based off of these comparative DNA data sets. The majority of DNA products that you purchase today, they're just comparing you to other sets of DNA that they've picked up that have other points of data that come with them. Like, I think it was only in the past few months, funny enough, if you know when this is being recorded and when this is being published, that different sections of 23andMe now show different regions in Judea or Palestine or Israel and marks different social groups and saying, hey, you're this percent of that. That changed people's heritage according to this definition of percentages that they were using to sort of identify themselves with. Because it was all comparative data in the first place, that's either one entity or a group of entities that are custodying that data that they've received from the general public and then using that to try to compute or estimate what others' DNA might indicate. That's already a wildly assumptive system. I mean, I learned a long time ago, don't stack two maybes together. You're just going to make yourself fucking crazy at that last level. It's already uncertain at this point. You're accepting some assumptions here. Don't stack those assumptions together here and keep them marked down as truths. So in my opinion, the sort of raw way of keeping that data is that you could recompare against a new data set. You could recompare against somebody else. Hey, I just met you, but we look a lot alike. It sounds like our great-grandparents have similar stories. Can we compare our genetic code? A cat and a diff make a lot more sense to me to be actually reviewing each other's code and comparing it with other people instead of throwing it into these larger black boxes. It's not that those black boxes can't be productive. It's that because it's a business, you're not telling me what's in the black box. And even if you tell me, you're not responsible to tell me whenever it changes. These are centralized, closed systems. These are for-profit companies. There's not a strong way for them to convince me that that data is going to be accurate over time because it's based on their changing data set. As I was saying before, that that data has just changed for 23andMe. So I think that the article goes into some detail about the utility of DNA on chain and a couple of things. But now that the consumer chains are kind of winding down, I can say confidently that the DeBio product was really good. And by the way, they decided that because it's difficult to get labs to participate in this kind of data compliance, they also released a product for period tracking, which I just take a quick tangent for that. Period tracking is a really difficult business in the United States because there's custody of that data. There's people worrying that that data is being consumed by entities who want to monitor, whether people are pregnant or not, and, I should say women are pregnant or not. But that that entire business of
yeah, you have to be careful with it.
I should say maybe I should keep my mouth shut. I don't know. But in the modern era, this kind of data, this bio data, it's not just sensitive, it's personal because it's being abstracted into these larger systems of authority, and that just doesn't need to happen. It doesn't need to be done that way. So DeBio's model was saying, hey, we're going to use that same encryption model that we were using before so that you can reference your data. You can give a third party your public key effectively and say, hey, you don't see my actual monthly routine, but you can have a hash that verifies it's me. You can know that I'm this entity, because I'm not going to post it on two other addresses. Then I'll, be trying to confuse you back and forth. And, there's a whole thing about keeping that still permissionless without constraining people to maintaining only a singular address. But the idea of letting people get a reference for your health data and not need the actual data, I feel like we're going to see people reattempt that, not necessarily with ZKPs, because there's all of this, optimistic cryptography and sort of short throw cryptography that's supposed to be used in the moment for verifying that someone is who they say they are, or that they have had an interaction with another third party that you want to trust. I see that as a moderately productive way to get out of the pigeonholing of the financial system. Is that a blockchain solution? No, it's more of a proof system. It's more of a, referential hash system across multiple tiers of forms of data, levels of access. There's a whole architecture that we could get into discussing, but I think you get my point. It's that there's no reason why we can't take some advantages for these things. But to your point also, having just raw data on chain does not solve a problem. Just publishing information so that it can be accessible ultimately doesn't replace the existing functionality. It doesn't augment the existing functionality. It can be very degrading for the existing functionality. Say, oops, people found out that I have cancer and it's on chain. That's wildly difficult to maintain when you recognize that blockchains are not supposed to be short throw products. They're not SaaS. They're going to live for years and years if that monetary environment's successful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, let me just retort a little bit and then back to move us to the other topic from here, more or less. But, I definitely agree. I definitely agree that putting something on the centralized ledger, I mean, we can probably now think of a case where it will go backwards, but in most cases, putting something on the centralized and a verifiable ledger will give you more superpowers. Will kind of add you to the Marvel list. I mean, what I was referring to, what I guess is not so much why to do it. It's more about, and this is the cypherpunk in me speaking, the anarchist in me speaking. Of like when I see, especially with Ethereum, with the legal side of things, when they take a law and they try an existing law from the real world and they go, okay, let's put it in a smart contract. What? Why? What do you want to do with it? Like, what do you want to achieve? You want to take we all know that our legal system in every single fucking country is a mess, right? We all know that. It's a year's books like that. Nobody's ever read the whole thing. Not in a single country. Not maybe the AI has, but anyways. And I guess this is what I was trying to get at. It's like, it seems to me that putting existing law into smart contracts rather than seeing the benefits that smart contracts can give and trying to adjust the law, it seems that putting raw DNA data on the blockchain, not about, somebody found out I have cancer, but a corporation, a monopolistic corporation with evil intents, mm-hmm. can make it worse.
Yep.
I guess we're talking about the same thing, but I guess this is what I was trying to get at, kind of thing.
When I say people, I definitely am looking out for the most malicious person in comparison with the use case I want to meet. So that most malicious person would definitely be an Amazon or a Microsoft or a large company that's trying to get into healthcare, because goodness knows both of them are trying to bust into healthcare, and even the public recognizes, hey, aren't you my IT guy? Shouldn't you not be in my bloodstream? What do you want? What are you doing? But I think really quickly, I think if you look at a lot of these other data systems of any type around healthcare and you look at what they're trying to achieve, less the legal system, a lot of that stuff is productive privacy. It is privacy at a level that's functional, where you can still use data that's coming from a private entity and bring it to a private entity. Does that mean that there's no room for a public system to help orchestrate that? No, not at all. Of course there can be, but doing it right doesn't necessarily require falling under the law. It requires seeing the intent and the sort of goals for that, system. If that system's goal is to fractionalize privacy in a way that you can preserve your privacy publicly and still be recognized as, a certain hash or as an ID, and still be using that to, allow data to move between two private entities. Yeah, it sounds messy because, of course, the law is going to be involved. These two private entities are in countries. They have their own laws to deal with. But if you summarize and try to go with just the absolute lowest common denominator and highest common values of those two companies, I say, why not have a trust network between them that's managed by me? I should be able to say, hey, I don't want company B to use this, but they would have to get my, authorization token. They have to get a non-reusable key from me. There's a whole loop-de-loop of, issuance of keys here that I should be talking about, but we don't have to get too deep into it. I just know that there's a pretty good measure for what I would be willing to accept for those kinds of security orchestration platforms. And at the moment, it's pretty not good, not just because trusted execution is not as strong as some of us had hoped it would be by now, But because even if you have trusted execution, there's still people in a pipeline of operations that can screw up, that can do something malicious, that can, accidentally disclose the majority of Americans' data onto the public internet, as happened recently for the last four of their social, and a whole bunch of PII that's easy to identify somebody and pretend to open a credit card and things like that. There's a lot of security parts that people get afraid of on privacy, or that are kind of seemingly more scary or uncomfortable because things become public. But it just takes a little bit of extra thought. Okay, hey, I do want to share this information between two parties. Is that an operation that's public? No. Is my ability to do that sort of thing something that everyone should have and be universal, without one person being able to say, hey, Sheldon's not allowed to use the healthcare system anymore because he's ID number 654329 and he's done something bad. We now consider Sheldon a terrorist and he's not allowed to use this health system. Like, no, that shouldn't be possible either. I should be able to leverage the interest of these health companies to get them to keep getting my business, and they have their own compliance to manage, sure, but that should be based on actions taken and data that's verified, not data that's given.
I love your optimism. I wish I had the same optimism, man. I mean, no, you're totally right. To be honest, in a scenario where everything is nice, this is how it will play out. Should play out. For the listeners out there, I recommend guys check out Eyal Harari. It's an Israeli crazy dude, very smart, very crazy dude. I'm not gonna speak about whose advisor he is. You will find it for yourselves, and when you realize that he's the advisor of the main guy from WEF, it creates a worse scenario. But do read those things and about DNA and about what is possible and the data can do with it, and it's crazy, guys. It's just like, it's a bit scary, but it's a bit crazy. But let's move to measures. I want to still ask you about measures because it's something I really, really wanted to ask you about. But before that, I just want to thank you for what you explained about security, because that could be applied to anywhere, and I think it should be applied to anywhere. The understanding of private and public key pairs, and the understanding of the power of those things. So thank you for saying that. What I wanted to ask you about measures is, I know you like your economics, and well, at least so one can make a judgment by looking at your internet. Your digital soul, let's call it like that. I want to ask you, as somebody who, it's going to be a bit of a selfish question. Sorry, listeners, but it's going to be a bit selfish. But as somebody who is building right now an Explorer/dashboard, and we're concentrating a lot on learning to measure things and to verifiably measure things, and we're trying to argue that one thing is better than another or whatever, but our opinions are our opinions. It's not for this conversation. What I want to ask you, and I think this will be useful definitely for everybody who's listening to it, and definitely to me at least. When you talk about chain health, there has been so much conversation about how should somebody measure chain health, what can go into that, and I can give my own opinion, of course, but it's not about, it will be too long. I want to hear yours. I want to understand how you think we should measure chain health, what should go into that, and also maybe, I know you're more on the technical side, but if you can try and give an advice for the average user that is might listen to this and want to say, hey, how do I understand if a chain is healthy or unhealthy? And of course, yeah, let's talk about it in general, but if you could give an advice like that, or what not to look at, for example, would also be useful, if it's possible, of course.
Well, I have to tell you that the cornerstone where I really turned a point on this mentality was reading about the Polkadot chain template years ago. It's not to say that this is all about Substrate. It's just there's a point of logic where Substrate, at the point of compile, when you're about to run that runtime, it's doing a throughput test on itself, and it makes a judgment call to say, hey, this is my 70% capacity. That's a software-based judgment. That's not saying, hey, my RAM is filled up 70%. That's based on total performance at this sort of, at run integration test, you can almost call it. Seeing a chain build that in as, hey, what we're targeting is 70% or better efficiency, and above that 70%, when we're getting into the 90-95 range especially, it's important to have an economic disincentive bound to that technical part. What I see in that system that I'm not explaining well for laymen, and I'll pull back for a second, is that in the design of technology to have a complete decoupling from economics doesn't work, but to have a really, really deep integration with economics is frequently too heavy a constraint. And it's difficult to sort of balance those two. But in my opinion, chain health, it can be looked at as an economic value because we're used to seeing chains as sort of publicly financialized products. And I think that there's a sort of different part of this conversation that goes with that, not just who's buying or who's maintaining liquidity or who's doing DeFi weird things that are silly, or who's trying to get the asset into new people's hands. There's a whole bunch of economic theorem to go into it, but at the point of operating and at the point of starting and running a chain, I think that health comes down to ultimately how well you can balance those resources versus those economic disincentives. Because the incentive is usually speculative, right? The incentive is usually, hey, this is cool, we can do something interesting, this is worth putting time, energy, money into. But the back burner, or that people seem to not pay attention to of that, is, hey, what happens when things go wrong? For example, there's many ETH2s right now that have not integrated fraud proofs. Does that mean that they are potentially toxic to the L1? I'm glad that we're talking about this in public now. Yes, we haven't been talking about this for quite a while. I'm sure you're familiar with this, but the general public isn't used to the idea that I could go from one, let's say, banking system to another banking system, and then that second banking system would just take my money, and I wouldn't be able to get it back to my main bank. I know that's a really crude way to sort of zoom out, but for a layman person who's just moving their money around and looking for a system of money, EIP 4334 is wildly intolerable to them, or at least it should be. It might be presented in this mode of, hey, we have the compliant Ethereum, and here's this easy app. You just click the pretty button, and it has the two gradient shading, and everything looks nice. It's very easy to get wrapped up in that UX-based argument, I think. But the UX-based argument is always a short-term one. In the long term, what's actually happening? What is the result? Oh, you mean the app's not the most pretty, but I have control over my own money? Hey, that's great. Oh, there's a really big catch that I missed out on that's not based on consensus across a group of people? Okay, I should probably know what these risks are. Like, there's a part of it that is also, I think, healthy disclosure when you talk about chain health. If you are telling people that, hey, Bitcoin is the future of money, Bitcoin's the greatest, Bitcoin's never going away, I feel like you're almost doing them a disservice. You're skipping the financial literacy, you're skipping the technological literacy, you're skipping the, privacy-based data incentives, just all kind of things that other entities might be coming to that network with. If you just blindly go the future of money, are you really solving a problem? No, you're just moving a problem from point A to point B, which is part of why the SEC has gotten way too involved in international dealings, in clamping down on OpenSea recently, like all kind of silly things. But to get back closer to your question, because I hear myself being a couple tangents off, ultimately I want to see a balance of dynamic adjustment in compute resources, the ability for the computers that actually run that chain to make updates, to make changes, to do things that are agreed by the rest of the operators without wildly risking the chain going into a hard fork or a halt, and simultaneously being able to manage those economic incentives of, hey, if we do onboard another 10,000, 100,000 users right now, is that going to break UX and therefore cause a problem? Well, I'd much rather we prepare the backend for those sorts of things than try to worry about the UI being a problem, because a website's a website. Even if it's IPFS served website, that's still one endpoint, the person, the user. There's always going to be that one endpoint that we come back to, unless I start carrying 4 HPCs in my pocket in a cluster. I don't think that's happening tomorrow. Might not happen in my lifetime. But you get my point. When it comes down to the user being an endpoint, saying, hey, the user is almost a single point of failure, if you recognize that as something that you can't really change, then you can look at redundancy, high availability, all kinds of other resistance to just regular activity on the internet. You can view that as an opportunity to create resilience instead of a chance to become more pressured. Someone said they were sort of threatening to attack Bitcoin the other day. I was like, go for it, please. We need you. You have to do it. If you think there's anything worthy in this system, you've got to give it a joust. Otherwise, you're just accepting Bitcoin the future, everything good. Please, other systems save me. Like, no, it's not productive.
A fucking man. Really a fucking man, because it's ridiculous how many people don't, in my opinion, I'm sorry to say that and people will hate me for it, but it's ridiculous how many people don't fucking understand that simple thing. I've been saying, and this is, I think, a nice way for us to like wrap up and go to the Blitz, but just to agree with you there, like over the last, how many years, I don't know now, 13 whatever years I've been in this industry, not working of course, but working maybe almost 10 soon enough, 9 8. But I've realized one fucking thing: don't tell people about Bitcoin. If you want them to start using Bitcoin, tell them how fucking ridiculous the system is. Their first question after an hour: what do I do? Well, exactly, what do you do? There we go. Tell them about the current system. They don't know nothing about it. When you start telling them like I'm sorry, I'm getting excited, but when you start telling people like I've realized about Bitcoin, about the future of money, they can, well, okay, whatever. Tell them about what's really going on around them today, and they will ask you, how the fuck do I buy Bitcoin? It's a different, it just works, and it's a simple thing. Yeah, so thank you for saying that, man. Let me jump quickly into the Blitz. I like I said, in a good conversation I can never keep track, but let's jump quickly into the Blitz. It's going to take us out of those questions. There's going to be 3 questions. They're completely different from what we talked about, but it's still about you. So first one, give me or a movie or a book or a song that has a positive influence on Sheldon, either throughout your life or lately within some years. Positive influence.
If I had to pick a positive influence, it's still going to sound kind of dark for a book. It would probably be Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five.
I haven't read.
It's a really, really depraved book. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I think that
I love it.
people who are being like dopamine enriched and are still below 25, I do recommend you read it, not just because it's not fun, but because there's a different level of experiencing war, of experiencing sort of a drift in time and not being able to glue things as easily together in your mind and still needing to make really conscious, really critical, I said conscious, not conscience, sort of moral decisions and just, difficult memories and making them useful to you. I feel like that book primed me a lot for being able to make the frustrations that I had with global systems, specifically U.S. systems. That primed me for being able to accept a little bit more, try to grow a little bit more, just be in that category of almost Zen of like, leaving behind the things I can't affect and, maybe understand, but I'm being frustrated with. I have to focus on these things where I can make an impact or where life happens, etc. There's a difficult way that I could or should describe that book. It's basically the equivalent of someone who's losing their memory, trying to recall war and also their childhood at the same time. There's a little more to it than that, but Kurt Vonnegut is a pretty famous writer, and they used to ask students to read his works all the time in high school, and I don't really see that anymore. It's the same way that Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 about burning books and authoritative control, also a very important book. These kinds of things are not what we're targeting, thinkers with anymore. I say the youth under 25 because your brain hasn't completely, sort of physically aged out yet.
Yes.
But even above that, anybody can learn who wants to maintain their neuroplasticity. You can keep learning into your 80s if that's what you want to do. The people, especially who are in that younger form, they're going to watch these semi-authoritarian systems pretend to be less authoritarian and become more authoritarian. It's been a trend for years now. COVID was a good example of it in some senses, like the flexing of the authoritarianism. But it doesn't mean that it's a change or a derivation. It means that by reading something like that helps you see authority in a more 3D form and see the impacts on regular people and see the potential impact on you, you can get ahead of, oh no, the government did something that hurt me. What shall I do? That's a very linear way of addressing those kinds of experiences that are going to come to most of us in life. Instead of getting so hurt and frustrated at those kinds of things like I did for years, I would highly recommend to anyone who's trying to anticipate systems that don't work the best, hey, here's a human experience of someone who was in the thick of the most painful parts of these systemic failures. What is it like to go through that? Or can I, empathize with them in some way? where do I not empathize with them, and what does that mean for me? You don't have to be a goody two shoes, a good person or whatever to appreciate these books. But if you recognize that authority isn't infallible, then those kinds of books are very, very helpful. If I had to pick one other, I'd probably point out manufacturing consent. I don't remember it nearly as well. And Chomsky has since gone the other way, so I'm a little bit hesitant to summon one of the authors, though Edwards is still just fine. But the main theme of that story you can find online in an Al Jazeera animated short on YouTube for just 5 minutes. There's a couple other platforms that have it uploaded. I don't think it's on Rumble yet, but I hope someone will put it on Theta or LivePeer sometime. But there's a really healthy 5-minute explanation that you can find online about manufacturing consent, which is mostly that there are systems of incentives that predate any government structure in order to centralize power and increase that authoritative control over large groups of people because it's efficient, because it's necessary when you have armies as a system of government, because it's necessary when you have an issuer maintaining a currency. And it's not that that necessarily means things are good or bad, but it'll give you a different angle at this phrase that I came across years ago called soft power, which is the way that economies of scale, or G7, for example, will leverage each other in order to get what they want out of the other and still maintain their goals and incentives, even if those goals and incentives are unsavory. Do you have to zoom out all the way to macro political theory to feel comfortable in your own home and have a political discussion? No, I don't think so. But it certainly helps to have this more reasonable, larger known unknowns instead of just saying, well, I don't know if the media is going to collaborate with the government. Besides that, you could look up Operation Mockingbird and all kinds of things that obviously have been done for, collaboration that probably shouldn't have been done. There's a really good argument to say that you can assume some of these incentives are going to exist in systems where people don't just have to eat, but have a speculative nature on themselves, that they are ambitious in the sense that this, system of incentives includes incentives to become more ambitious. It sounds super self-serving because it is.
Absolutely.
No,
it makes sense. Makes sense. It makes sense. I think it makes sense. I think that what you say is a big lack of like as a joke, just to kind of level it out a little bit. I was reading this neurodivergency jokes for people who are neurodivergent, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and about the neuroplasticity of a brain of a vampire who turned to be a vampire as 12 or 15, hence never reaching neuroplasticity and always being like in that state of am I okay, am I not okay, but okay, second question, I promise. Give me one motivational thing that helps Sheldon wake up every day, work on Omnity, carry on building things, researching things, and having that drive that you, of course, came to the show today with.
Well, it might not be what you'd expect. It's a little bit, excuse me, it's a little bit off topic. Sorry, but I was raised Jewish, and there's a lot of things that I sort of retained and preserved from that early education. And there's a lot of things that I reject and don't make sense for me, and I don't keep that as part of my authority-based view on the world. But tikkun olam means repair the world, and I feel motivated that because I'm lucky and blessed, I'm sitting in a comfortable house. I got to learn on music and technology when I was young. I went to private school for grades 1 through 6. I had some luxuries and privileges that a lot of people don't have. I feel compelled because I got to absorb those things through no action of my own, that even though I can't give those things to people, I owe the world something. I feel compelled that I have to do something to give back, not because I need to be special or because I need to feel like I make an impact or something like that. I don't need to take a picture of me doing something good to feel like I did something good, but I do need to feel like I do something good for other people in the longer stretch of time. If I just work for corporations, I can make a lot of money. If I was just focused on making money, oh boy, I would have made a lot more by now. I would have not helped nearly as many people. I would have not lent money to people and done things like, of course, many times you help somebody out and they don't pay you back. Fine. It is what it is. I feel that I wouldn't have done those kinds of things. I wouldn't have got myself into these like over empathetic, almost nonsensical situations if I didn't genuinely believe that every day I needed to try to do something good that wasn't just for me. And there was a period where I was kind of stuck on this, but yeah, it's something that everyone has to develop independently.
Could I'm trying to understand. That's I'm not trying to interrupt, trying to understand. Could I say that your motivation is giving back?
That's a much cleaner way to say it. I think that repair the world
Okay.
comes with a lot of judgment and, oh, hey, you're broken, I'm going to fix you. It's not like that. Just help people and get back. It's not an authoritarian thing to say you want to help people, right?
לתקן את העולם. Here is a fun fact. I served in the Israeli Air Force once upon a time. It's a fun fact for the listeners and for yourself. But yeah, we have a lot in common.
I wanted to join when I was younger.
Please, no. You did a good thing. That I've been there, done it, got a T-shirt. A good thing that you didn't. Last question, and I promise this one is a crazy, weird one.
Okay.
But I promise it's the last one. Dead or alive, real or not real. So it could be somebody you know, like your grandfather, or it could be Mickey Mouse, or an author, a developer, a writer, a cartoon character, a movie character, alive, dead, doesn't matter. Not a guru, because I personally just don't believe in them. But someone or somebody or a personage or a real human that you know, not that you look up to them, but you kind of ask yourself the question of how would they solve a really difficult situation you are stuck in, or kind of look up to them a little bit somehow, but not worship them. Definitely not. That is something I'm trying to avoid.
No, I certainly don't have any heroes anymore, and I was foolish a couple of times to hope that someone's incentives would align with me or someone's motivations align with me. Having heroes isn't helpful. But I'll say that when I did have heroes, it was certainly my dad. I have to point that out, that he's done a lot of
Nice.
great things, and I do ask him for help. And, in the sense of mechanical, how to get through stuff, I do lean on him. And he's a great guy. You can look him up if you like. And I say he's a great guy because that's a third-party verifiable information. Not that I think he's the greatest thing ever. But if I had to point out a person who I'm not naming as dad, I would say it's probably Slavoj Zizek, who's this kind of influencer, silly philosopher guy. I'm a really big fan of his take on Hegelian philosophy. And in a nutshell, he wants to take the learnings that informed Karl Marx without taking Karl Marx as the base of a philosophy, because he's not trying to take Marxism as the explanation for something. He's trying to use it as a contrast for the modern world against these teachings that Marx received before he, started writing all his manifesto, whatever the heck. So first of all, the guy's really funny. I got to give him a shout out for being a comedian. But second of all, he's really, really logical. And if you could get through the snap and all this kind of, like, he has this, sort of Uzbekistani communication style. It's difficult to get through sometimes. If you can get through that, you can hear him debate Jordan Peterson for, I think it's something like 3 hours.
Nice.
It's a very, very long conversation.
Nice.
And he's widely recognized as the winner in that sort of debate or discussion. And it's not because Peterson annoys the hell out of me, because Peterson absolutely annoys the hell out of me. I can't stand him, honestly.
Of everybody.
I mean, if you lose your title as a psychologist, you got to be doing something wrong. If that board comes and revokes your title, clearly you didn't just piss them off. You've got to be doing something that's not appropriate. But even outside of that, the way that those arguments come down to it, when you come to like sort of a lower level of, hey, we believe that humans have these assumptive behaviors, or we believe that humans are inherently good or inherently bad, the way that he manages those arguments, I think, are much more practical than I've heard other people bring them up. They're not always based on, hey, well, you've seen this thing in history where in this instance these people did this. It's frequently him saying, hey, in the modern world, if X happened to you, would you consider Y as your most likely course of action, or do you think the majority of people would pick X? I think that's a really productive way to go about philosophy, because then you don't have to just build on the old conventions. You don't have to just reestablish old assumptions. You can make new assumptions based on social media and dopamine being plugged into everybody all the time. that can change the way you approach philosophy of demographics. So yeah, Slavoj is a very interesting fellow.
I think that, that point of, I personally haven't, I'm not familiar with Slavoj, so thank you for saying that. Once again, listeners, guys, check out all the show notes. But, on that note of not being stuck in the past, I think that that's a perfect note to finish off on, because at least for me, it's always been, traditions can be beautiful, and so can many other things. But let's be honest, traditions and they can be evil, and they change. History, sorry, not history, but time goes on, and I just hope that more people start to realize that sometimes something new doesn't mean bad. It doesn't mean that if we change traditions or something that we used to do for 500 or even 500,000 years, because maybe the reality changed. We need to adapt, and that's what makes us the strongest, at least today. At least we like to believe so. We are arrogant enough to believe so, that we are this number one on this. But anyways, I'm also going off topic. But Sheldon, I want to thank you and wrap up, and thank you very much for your time, for your answers. Please don't hang up just yet, though. Everybody else, thank you very much for tuning in. Sheldon, bye.
This content was created by the Citizen Web3 Validator. If you enjoyed it, please support us by delegating on citizenweb3.com/staking and help us create more educational content.